Okay, folks, I think we're going to get this webinar going now this evening. We're just giving people a couple of minutes to come in and join us there. You're very welcome to Dublin Festival of History, and it's Dublin Festival of History 2023, of course, by Dublin City Council, Dublin City Libraries, and the Dublin City Council Culture Company. This event this evening, just to let everybody know, has been recorded. You can visit our website, dublinfestivalofhistory.ie, for more details about this. And of course, all the other events, there are 200 events, just over that, I think, taking place this year over the 3 weeks from Monday 25th September right through to Sunday 15th October. And of course, our big weekend taking place this weekend in Printworks Dublin Castle, with loads of events and things going on there. So check out the website, or if you've managed to pick up one of our brochures, I'm sure you'll have a good read through that. So here with us this evening, we have Laz Fallon for his talk, which is A City Remembers Dublin Fire Brigade Memorial Plaques. Laz Fallon is a retired Dublin firefighter and historian to the Dublin Fire Brigade. His publications include Dublin Fire Brigade and the Irish Revolution, and a history of the Whiskey Fire. And Laz is going to do his presentation there for around 45 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor there for a few questions that you can add to the chat. So if anything comes to mind, just pop it in there, and we'll see if we can get around to answering as many of them as we can at the end of the discussion. But I'm going to switch off now because I've been chatting for more than long enough, and hand you over to Laz for Dublin City Remembers Dublin Fire Brigade Memorial Plaques. Thanks, Laz.
Thanks very much. I wrote the talk yesterday, but I was reminded this morning. I'll return to it in a moment. I was just reminded this morning that today is the 16th anniversary of the deaths in the line of duty of Sub-Officer Brian Murray and firefighter Mark O'Shaughnessy at a fire in Bray, County Wicklow in 2007, and may they rest in peace. I was on duty in Dolphin's Barn that day, and we were watching the 1 o'clock news, and a report of a serious incident at a fire in Bray was mentioned. There was a kind of an undertone to the way it was said that suggested that something very bad had happened. We soon learned that 2 firefighters had died in the fire. We were on duty for Brian Murray's funeral, but I attended Don O'Shaughnessy's funeral. I remember the grief of the family and the sea of blue with firefighters from brigades all over Ireland and further afield, including members of the FDNY. And the men from New York, of course, had their own memories of firefighters dying on a September morning. It reminded me also that on the 11th of September 2001, on 9/11, my watch was on duty when the first reports of the attacks on the Trade Centre came in. At first, like everybody, it seemed like an awful accident, but the news of a second plane and the other attacks made it clear that it was anything but. I remember as we watched that first tower fall, we were all in shock. Everybody, that's all, everybody reacted with shock. But as it fell, my good friend, the late Billy Boland, just said quietly, "We're watching firemen die." Funny, well, pretty far from funny, but the FDNY hit a strange record just 2 days ago. 343 firefighters died on 9/11. The 343rd firefighter died 2 days ago from 9/11 related illnesses, from cancers and respiratory illnesses, which many of the rescuers picked up in the days after the attack. Firefighting by its nature is dangerous work. It extracts a physical and a mental toll from those who follow that trade, but sometimes it takes more. Sometimes it takes life itself. When it does, and the needs of families and those left behind are dealt with, it's only right that we turn to remembering those who are lost. That, in essence, is the motivation behind the DFB Memorial Plaque Scheme. Now, the talk as it should have been. Thank you very much for the introduction and a sincere welcome to everybody who's joined us tonight. It's a great pleasure to take part in the Dublin Festival of History, as always. And this talk also marks Dublin Fire Brigade becoming a partner organisation with the festival. Having said that, I should have made clear that although I was a former member, I was a firefighter for 32 years, my views and comments are my own and not those of the Dublin Fire Brigade. I have to say that in case I say something that I shouldn't. Plaques, statues and memorials are an excellent way to connect with the past. But to my mind, the plaque, properly done, is superior. It captures a piece of history in a very site-specific way. This happened here, rather than the usually off-site positioning of statues. Dublin statues also have a habit of wandering around the city, and some have even disappeared through various means over the years. I mean, you just have to look at, I passed the floozy in the jacuzzi the other day on the bus going to town, and she's far from O'Connell Street now. She's there at the Esplanade there at Collins Barracks. Very strange looking statue because it was designed to sit in a kind of a granite bathtub, for want of a better description, whereas now she simply rises from the water. She looks like a vampire in the early hours. Other statues, of course, have also moved around the city. Some of them have disappeared. The poor Admiral Nelson became an astronaut. Field Marshal Gough's poor neutered horse was finally done away with. Others, as I say, have moved, be it Molly Malone or John Gray or other various statues have been moved around. Plaques tend to be very site-specific, this is where it happened. For an organisation founded in 1862, Dublin Fire Brigade was badly served historically in terms of plaques or monuments. My good friend Tom Geraghty was behind the erection of a plaque in the 1990s at the site of the Pearse Street disaster. And that plaque there, a wonderful plaque. A memorial stone in carved granite had stood nearby for some time following the 50th anniversary in 1986, but it was later moved to a place in the Dublin Fire Brigade Training Centre in Marino in the OBI, where it still stands, very well looked after and appreciated. Tom Geraghty's plaque was the first permanent memorial at the actual site of an incident and the only public plaque to Fallon DFB members. And of course, it's only one part of Tom's huge legacy of work. Tom's book, Dublin Fire Brigade, A History of the Brigade, the Fires and the Emergencies, is essential reading for anyone interested in the history of Dublin Fire Brigade. I've always believed that the sites where firefighters lost their lives should be marked. I've seen memorials in London, New York, at fire stations and in other places on the actual fire grounds where events happened. Tooley Street in London, where James Braidwood, the father of the British Fire Service and the chief officer of what was then the London Fire Engine Establishment, later the London Fire Brigade, died. Many of our Dublin fire stations now include memorial walls or gardens where members from that station who've died are remembered. It's a very honourable thing to do, and it gives great solace to the comrades, the families and friends of those members. I was actually talking to somebody this morning about that very thing, about those memorial gardens in the stations, and he mentioned one which I haven't seen. I haven't been in the station about 10 years. Finglas apparently has a really nice memorial garden done within it, and it's a place I must pay a visit to. My idea was always that there should be a public acknowledgement of those who'd lost their lives in the line of duty at the actual sites. In 2016, I was working on heritage projects for the brigade around our involvement in the Rising and the Irish Revolution. To mark our involvement, which was overlooked in 1966, on the 50th anniversary, the Dublin Fire Brigade weren't involved, in spite of the fact that they were the only organisation, the only full-time organisation that actually existed at the time. The brigade was founded in 1862. The other organisation, which was around, of course, at that stage, was the St. John's Ambulance, but everybody else kind of post-dates that they're 1922 and onwards. To get this plaque done, I worked with an in-house crew based in our stores department, and Dave Snee, a fellow recruit from the class of 1985 in particular, to create a plaque honouring our members who'd fought in the Rising. It was unveiled at a ceremony in Glasnevin Cemetery, where 5 of the 7 of them by chance were buried, and a parallel ceremony took place to mark 2 other graves in Mount Jerome at the same time. The wreaths were laid there. The plaques, the families were actually in Glasnevin for the unveiling of the plaque, and that plaque now hangs in the entrance hall at the Brigade Training Centre. Working on it again gave me a push towards getting on-street plaques. This had been emphasised to me in late 2015 when a family on holiday from Canada called into Dublin Fire Brigade headquarters. Tony Dermon had been born in the old married quarters, and his father had died in an accident in the station in 1938. Tony called in, and I was delighted to meet him. Absolutely delighted to meet him. But had to explain that there was no plaque there to mark his family's loss. I knew of his father, and I'd written about him in some of my books. It reinforced my desire to see these men properly remembered. A few years later, there was a serendipity, I think, between two sets of events. In the north, the Fire Brigades Union, the FBU, had asked me to be involved in their planning for the union's 100th anniversary. One of the events the FBU nationally intended was to introduce a plaque scheme to mark the place of death of all British and Northern Irish firefighters. It was a hugely ambitious scheme, which is still ongoing, and it's funded by the Firefighters charity in the UK, which is administered by the FBU. I was very proud to be invited to Belfast for the unveiling of the first Northern Ireland plaque. And I've been back for a number of others since. That was the first plaque in Belfast. It's in the courtyard behind the ICTU offices there, behind the I can't think of the name, the pub there. They share a courtyard, and it's in at the back of that. It's the actual plaque as it was unveiled. Since then, individual plaques have gone up to remember firefighters with their names on it. It was very much a hands across the border event, and the Dublin Fire Brigade band were invited to play at it. In fact, that was done on a May Day in Belfast, and the DFB pipe band led the May Day procession in Belfast that year with the Fire Brigades Union, with the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service. Since then, I've been at plaque unveilings in Armagh, Belfast, and Cookstown, and I'd like to extend a special thanks to Jim Quinn, Chairman of the Fire Brigades Union, number 2 region, Northern Ireland, for his friendship and for allowing me to be involved in these occasions, and indeed to the others, to Matt Rack, Ben Selby, and Ian Murray, and many others in the FBU for their friendship, hospitality, and comradeship down the years. In Dublin, the DCC plaque scheme, launched in 2014, was going well. I attended a number of unveilings and was hugely impressed with the plaques themselves and with the planning and effort that went into getting them made and erected. It's an amazing scheme, and one which we should all be proud of, especially those involved with administering it in DCC. They're often overlooked. The people behind these things are often overlooked. Without them, it couldn't happen. Looking at the scheme, I wondered if it might work as a vehicle to mark the DFB line of duty deaths. COVID, of course, intervened, and the world turned upside down. All plans went on the back burner. Just over a year ago, a conversation with Councillor and former Lord Mayor Micheál McDonagh, then chair of the Commemoration and Naming Committee, led to a meeting in City Hall with himself and Brendan Teeling, the Assistant City Librarian, and the man who administers the scheme, and let me say to whom I'm deeply grateful for the help and support he gives. I supplied a list of 7 men who had died in the line of duty in 4 separate incidents from 1884 to 1938. The total Dublin Fire Brigade line of duty death toll would be 10, but started with these men who died basically in the city centre in those years. These were the ones who had been left longest without commemoration. I was delighted that it was proposed that DFB plaques would have their bottom section in red to mark the fire service connection. These plaques are polished granite, and each heritage plaque has a blue section at the bottom. If it's related to the Irish Revolutionary period, it has a green section at the bottom. The Fire Brigade ones will have a red. And I thought it was a great idea. I thought it was a great honor for plaques. The wording on them is very simple. It'll have the person's name and the date of the death, and then say a Boss or Douglas on Shaw died here in the line of duty. The men to be remembered were as follows: John Kite, the first Dublin Fire Brigade fatality, killed in a fire and building collapse in Trinity Street in 1884. Trinity Street is just off Dame Street there. It'd go from, for those who know the landmarks around Dublin, it'd run from the Penn Corner up to just nearly opposite the Trocadero there. On the 20th of March 1884, a fire was discovered at number 10 Trinity Street. The fire brigade was on the scene within minutes. The brigade headquarters at the time was just off South William Street there in Coppinger Row. They were on the scene within minutes. They found fires on 3 levels of the building. Firefighters entered the building to fight the flames when it collapsed without warning, trapping 9 men inside. A number of firefighters and officers were seriously injured, some indeed never to regain their full strength or return to the brigade. And one man, Thomas Kite, had died in the collapse. To give an idea of the impact that this had on Dublin Fire Brigade at the time, the total strength of the brigade in 1884 was 28 men. 9 of them had been injured, only 2 of whom were in a position to return to work immediately. There'd been a fatality and there'd been a number of very serious injuries, which led to the retirement of the men involved. It was a hugely significant thing. And John Kite was the first Dublin fireman to lose his life on duty. In 1891, Christopher Doherty and Peter Burke died on the 20th of May 1891 while rescuing a female resident from a fire at 30 Westmoreland Street. The alarm had been raised at 2 a.m. and the brigade summoned. The building was on fire at the 3rd floor level. The street fire escape from Foster Place was first to arrive, and the fireman with it, Patrick Barry, rescued a trapped woman from the top floor and informed the officer of the arriving fire crew, Inspector Christopher Doherty, that there was a further woman trapped by the flames, which were now extending from the front of the building at floor level. At that time, there would have been street fire escapes, which were basically ladders on wheels, and they were dotted around the city at points like Nelson's Pillar. Foster Place would have been the Bank of Ireland, Leinster House, at Catherine's Church, at a number of various spots, and a fireman stood with them through the night. In the event of a fire in the area, he would bring the ladder to the scene immediately, with the hope that a rescue could be made while the brigade were on their way from the station with a fire engine. In this case, Doherty and Peter Burke, a fireman with only 4 months' service, mounted the ladder and rescued the trapped woman. Other firemen mounted the ladder both to fight the flames at 3rd floor level with a hose. The flames at the 3rd floor were actually now coming right out of the building and actually threatening the ladder and the people on it. So a group of firemen took a hose up to fight that. Others went to assist with the rescue. And at that point, the overloaded ladder collapsed, throwing both Burke and Doherty to the ground, where they sustained massive injuries from which they both died. That's the contemporary image of the scene. This is the plaque which has gone up there to remember them, and that was unveiled on the 19th of May. The 20th of May was the anniversary. It was unveiled on the 19th of May. As you say, the Lord Mayor and the Chief Fire Officer. That was the first of the Dublin Fire Brigade plaques to go. As I say, they're actually a lovely plaque. There's a lovely aesthetic to them. The design of them is really good. And they're simple. The names, the date, and the simple statement. Died here in the line of duty. And the red marker at the bottom is a very, very special thing, I think, to mark these fire brigade plaques. It'll make them immediately jump out when they're seen. This was the great disaster, Pearse Street, and we've seen a plaque earlier that Tom Geraghty had erected to this. This is the one event that has tended to be well remembered within the fire brigade and commemorated on anniversaries and so forth. On the night of the 5th October 1936, a fire was discovered on a premises at numbers 163 and 164 Pierce Street. The fire brigade turned out immediately from the nearby headquarters at Tara Street and established that all residents were evacuated. There was no threat to life. That was the main thing. Firefighters entered the building with hoses to locate and fight the fire. At the period, there were severe water shortages at night in Dublin, which had led to the city water mains being reduced to a trickle at night. It had been an ongoing problem for a number of years, and the way that it was dealt with at the time, without the resources to update the water mains, they simply shut them down at night, and they were shut down from the control box at Leeson Street. In the event of a major fire, the Waterworks Department were to be contacted, and they were to contact the control room at Leeson Street, and they would open the mains to the affected area to allow firefighting to go on. Due to bad communications on the night, that message didn't go through to the Leeson Street control for the water mains, and no water was available to the men fighting the fire in Pierce Street. 4 men had taken a hose to the roof of the building to fight the fire, which had originated in the basement. The basement was being used by a battery factory who assembled their batteries there and held large stocks of very flammable material, including gas cylinders. As the men on the roof, firemen Bob Malone, Peter McArdle, Thomas Nugent, and Tommy Potts, realised that they had no water, they decided to return to street level to help find working hydrants. As they began to leave the roof, the fires below reached the gas cylinders and the building was rocked by an explosion. On the roof, fireman Tommy Potts, who was near the edge, was able to jump to the next rooftop a story below. The other 3 men were lost as a second, more serious explosion collapsed the building and basically turned it into an inferno. They lie now in Glasnevin side by side, where they're remembered by the brigade in recent years, as I say, on significant anniversaries, and are probably, it's the event that most people in Dublin Fire Brigade would think of when they think of line of duty deaths. Some of the other people had basically kind of slipped through our history in a way. So Pierce Street was remembered, but others weren't, and that's part of what we're addressing with the plaque scheme. The last of the 7 men from the 4 incidents was Jack Darman. He was given this photograph many years ago by the late Terry Potts, who was a nephew of Tommy Potts, the man who'd escaped the Pierce Street fire, the Pierce Street disaster. I was working with Terry at the time, and he knew I had an interest in history. He came in one day with this photograph and sort of said, "You might be interested in it." At first, looking at it, a tricolour draped coffin on the back of a fire engine with brass helmeted, firemen with it, I assumed it was the Pierce Street funerals, but then realised that it wasn't, because the other engine should have been, looking at other photographs, the engines were together and the marching body behind them, and it didn't fit for that. I remember showing it sometime later to Tom Geraghty, and he said it had to be Jack Darman's funeral, which sparked an interest in me in Jack Darman. The use of the tricolour as opposed to the Dublin city flag also sparked a huge interest, because I have an interest in firefighters who took part in the revolutionary period, in many different roles. Some within the brigade and some without, who'd later joined the brigade, but others who were actually members of Dublin Fire Brigade when they took part in the War of Independence and Civil War. So that photograph triggered the Jack Darman story for me. Jack had joined the Dublin Fire Brigade in 1922. He was a veteran of the War of Independence, where he'd served with K Company of the 3rd Battalion, which, funny enough, would have been the local unit for the Tara Street area, all down through Pierce Street and further down. He joined the Dublin Fire Brigade after being interned for over a year in Ballykinler, having been picked up in the general sweep after Bloody Sunday. He was a transport officer with K Company. He hadn't actually taken part in a shooting on Bloody Sunday, but he had been part of a group of men who had provided cover for the squads who were going in to carry out the assassinations of the British officers. On a previous occasion, he'd been told, he'd been tipped off that there was an impending raid on the company arms dump, which was held at the time in Sandwich Street. Again, he was transport officer because he had access to vehicles. On the day, the only vehicle he had access to was a horse and cart. So he took the horse and cart to Sandwich Street, loaded the company arms and ammunition onto it, covered them with sacks, and was leaving the street as a raiding party from Dublin Castle arrived from the auxiliaries. He played a part in the Civil War, like a number of firemen who had previous IRA service. Some left the brigade to report back to their IRA units and actually took part in the fighting in Dublin at the start of the Civil War. Others operated within the brigade, mainly as couriers, doing sort of intelligence and logistics work on behalf of the Republican forces. Jack Darman mentioned they were able to travel through Free State lines fairly easily, and Jack Darman mentioned being able to get into garrisons and remove men who were needed outside by basically dressing them as wounded men and taking them out. He lived in the married quarters in Tara Street with his wife and 4 children. He was a driver, and as a driver also worked as a mechanic for the brigade. On the 23rd of August 1938, he was fatally electrocuted while working on a brigade ambulance in the engine pit in Tara Street. 1938 was a year of sweeping changes within the Dublin Fire Brigade. A new chief officer, new regulations, and the coming emergency all contributed to Fireman Darman's death on duty not being properly recognised and remembered. These were the men to be remembered. The committee accepted the premise that they should be properly remembered, and the process of getting the plaques up began. This is a photograph of the Fire Brigade in 1927. It's not the entire brigade, it's taken in Tara Street, but there's I'm not sure if we can actually show him on this, but Jack Darman is there in that photograph. This is him here. There's a number of others, very, very interesting people in here. Paddy Kelly, Tom Smart, Tom Kavanagh, all 1916 veterans, Joe Connolly, a 1916 veteran, Tom Curran, the man who, he was a seaman. He joined Dublin Fire Brigade after the Civil War. He joined in 1923. He'd been a sailor during the First World War, a merchant seaman who had been importing arms for the volunteers from 1917 and carrying messages to and from Philadelphia, in particular, McGarrity with the Clan na Gael. He was the man who smuggled in the first of the Thompson submachine guns, which were test fired in the grounds of the casino in Marino, which by pure chance is now the next door neighbour of the O'Brien Institute, the Dublin Fire Brigade Training Centre. So there's a number of men here who have massive history, and finding people. Photographs like this are the key to a history of a job like the Fire Brigade. Again, a group photograph. Joe Connolly, the chief officer, on the day that the helmets changed, on the day that the brass helmets were handed back in 1938, and the new electric shock-proof helmets were being handed out. This is Jack Darman here, facing the camera in the back row. Again, Tom Smart, Nick Bowen, another K Company man. A number of others can be identified in that. The actual helmet, which would be one of the ones in this photograph, is still owned by the Darman family. And the photograph would have been taken a very, very short time, months, maybe even weeks, before Jack was killed. It's an earlier photograph of him. This is him here at the rear of a fire engine, a Dublin Fire Brigade fire engine in County Louth. An odd story, the Gardaí requested a fire engine and crew from Dublin to come up and pump out a quarry where they suspected a body had been dumped. A local presbytery had been robbed, and the priest housekeeper was missing. And it was thought that a local man had robbed the house and murdered the girl and tried to make it look like she had robbed it and run away. So the answer was to pump out the quarry, and the firemen spent a week doing that. It's an odd little bit of fire brigade history, and as I say, it's lovely to be able to identify people in these photographs. So you have Jack Darman there, and you have Charles McDonough beside him. 3 men went up with the engine. That's the Darman. erected. And that only happened last week. It happened on Monday gone. And it's an absolute pleasure to see it there, to see it finally remembered, and remembered in the place where he died. The brigade headquarters has changed slightly, but it's still on the same footprint of land. And the entrance to the brigade headquarters and the engine bays and main block of the building stand on the site where the old married quarters were, which is where Jack Darman would have lived. One person I should mention, and I haven't, and who's absolutely crucial to the erection of these plaques, is the Chief Fire Officer, Dennis Keeley. It needed Dennis's approval and support to move these plans forward, and he's been very much involved in the process, and indeed thrown the resources of the brigade behind each unveiling. While the timeline of the deaths was clear, it was not as simple as it seemed, and the plaques have not been erected in chronological sequence. There are a plethora of permissions, etc., required from building owners, and that long process falls to Brendan Teeling and his team. As I said, Brendan's been fantastic to work with. I can't give high enough praise for his work. It was decided to start with the Westmoreland Street plaque to Doherty and Burke. The streetscape has changed, and the present building on the site is the premises of CCT College. The president of the college, Neil Gallagher, was brilliant to work with, absolutely was a joy to work with. From an initial meeting outlining the event being commemorated, he got 100% on board and very generously supplied a room, laid on a reception on the day for those who attended. I'd like to thank him and all at CTT for their hospitality and help. On the day, the weather was kind, and after a series of talks inside to an audience which included guests, retired DFB members and members of the present management team, the Lord Mayor unveiled the plaque while the DFB pipeline played a lament for the fallen. The second plaque was erected. Second plaque was erected on the 18th of the month. This one here, it was placed in DFB headquarters in Townsend Street, close to the place where Jack Darman died, and on the site of the old married quarters, as I said. If anything, it was an even more emotional day, as members of the Darman family from as far away as Canada gathered with DFB members serving and retired, councillors and other guests to hear some short talks on Jack's life and service. The plaque scheme itself and the unveiling of the plaque at the entrance to Dublin Fire Brigade headquarters by Councillor Tom Brabazon, who was deputising for the Lord Mayor that day. There are 4 plaques planned. There are 4 plaques put forward, 4 plaques agreed to in this first tranche. In the new year, we'll be looking at plaques to remember, more than likely in the new year. I say that, but it possibly before the end of the year, but most likely, realistically, because there are other plaques in the pipeline as well for other causes, other events. The next plaques will remember John Kite at Trinity Street and the 3 men killed at Pearse Street. While there's already a plaque at Pearse Street, it was felt that there should also be a DCC / Dublin Fire Brigade plaque to mark all the sites of the line of duty deaths equally. There's an inequality in death. And it was better, and I've spoken to Tom Geraghty about this, and he's in agreement that it's better that 2 plaques on a site remember something than no plaque. When they're finally up and unveiled, they'll form a line from Pearse Street via Townsend Street, Westmoreland Street to Trinity Street, a linear walk, and a message to all that Dublin Fire Brigade remembers its fallen members. As things stand, these plaques form the first tranche of DFB-related plaques. 3 other men died on duty. I'm very much aware of them, and I hope to address that with the Commemorations Committee in the near future. I'll say no more on that for the moment. That's an ongoing process, and the process must be respected and adhered to. So we'll go through the process, and hopefully that'll work out. Another plaque has been requested and is awaiting a decision. This will be a plaque to remember the first chief of the Dublin Fire Brigade, Robert Ingram. Personally, I'd love to see that erected in 2025, which will be the 150th anniversary of his great victory at the Liberty's Whiskey Fire, when he saved a large area of the city from destruction. As it stands, he lies in an unmarked grave, brave and honourable servant of the city. he deserves a memorial within the city that he served so well. It won't be a line of duty death, although he died. Well, his death was linked to the job in that he died from tuberculosis, which was the biggest killer of firemen in Dublin in the 19th century, because of the nature of the work and the tenements in Dublin and the horrible conditions within the tenements in Dublin. Firemen were very prone to contacting TB, and quite a number of them died. It's not a line of duty death in the sense that these ones that we remember with the plaques are, but the man himself deserves to be remembered for himself. The DCC plaque scheme is a wonderful project. If at some stage you find yourself walking our streets and you see that polished granite circle on the wall, take the time to read it and learn of the events or the people that it marks and commemorates. If you happen to see a plaque with a red base, take a moment to remember those Dublin firefighters who fell in the line of duty, serving this city and protecting all who live here. The Darman statue, the Darman plaque, again, is a really good example of these plaques and what they are. And by having it on a fire station, it'll be the only one that'll actually, well, in the present group, it'll be the only one actually on a fire station. And the others will be at the scenes. Jack Darman actually died. He died in the line of duty, he died on duty. So his death is equally to be regarded as a sacrifice in the same way as the men who died at Pearse Street or at Westmoreland Street, or indeed John Kite. They're part of our heritage that we're remembering and finally remembering. And it's lovely to be part of that. And that's our story, these plaques. Thank you all for listening in tonight. And Gramila Magav, if there are any comments or any questions, I'd be very, very happy to answer them. And again, thank you very much. I think at this point, hand back the no, there we are.
Hi, lads. How you doing? I was just coming back on there. And that was a great talk. Thanks very much now. Very interesting. So we have a question here from David. He just said, great talk, Laz. Was there anything found in the quarry?
Yes, sorry, there was, of course, yeah. They found the body. And the young girl who'd been, as I said, the priest's housekeeper, she'd been murdered by a local man who, in a way, I suppose, had attempted to frame her. He tried to make it look as if she'd robbed the premises and run off. He'd robbed the thing, he'd murdered her, he'd dumped her body in the quarry. When the quarry was emptied, she was found. Case was proven against him, and he was actually executed. He was hanged for that murder.
We have another question just come in there, Laz, from Jim. He said, excellent talk, many thanks. The real heroes of Dublin who are being remembered at last. Sorry, it wasn't a question, it's a comment. Couple more people just saying, great talk, thanks very much. Just scroll down and see if we have any more questions. Let me see. Lisa says, thanks for a great talk, lads. Very informative. Do you know how many firefighters have been killed in the line of duty in recent times?
Oh, in like I said, in Dublin, you know, we're looking at 10 in Dublin. The last three being 1966, 82, and 1994. Yeah, around the country, yeah. I think from memory, I think the lads in Wicklow, in Bray, may have been the last firefighters to die. But I know around the same time, a firefighter, I think his name is Liston, was killed in Limerick County. He was killed at the scene of a road traffic accident when a car drove into the scene, and both himself and a member of the Garda Síochána were killed there. It's sometimes difficult, even in terms of a line. We classified a line of duty death for this to be somebody who died while on duty as a result of an incident while on duty. Because there have been cases where people have died from medical causes at fires. But it's it's difficult to link that as a line of duty death. In some places it would be regarded as a line of duty death. For these ones, we wanted the people who had actually died by, I was going to say violence, not violence, but died as a result of firefighting, or in Jack Dermond's case, died while on duty, going about his business. He was accidentally electrocuted in the pit there in Tyler Street, and it's equally the same as the men who died off the roof in Westmoreland Street, or in Pearse Street, or Trinity Street. Difficult. It's. I remember some years back, and not too many years back, somebody was talking about trying to arrange an all-Ireland memorial for line of duty deaths in the fire service. I'm not sure how far that project went, but it's a very worthwhile project, and it's a project that could be approached both north and south. The FBU are working on the plaques in the north, so they would have very good kind of records there. In the Republic, it would be something that we would have to. Each brigade will remember its own, but it's something that should really be collated into a central statistic somewhere and remembered appropriately.
We had a question there last from Eileen. She says, were there many firemen injured or killed in the Rising to Civil War periods?
No, it's a short answer. Injured, yeah, but nobody was killed. Nobody was killed. Surprisingly, for people who were in the height of what was going on. This man here, Joe Connolly, the chief officer here, who's presenting the helmets. The man, Joe Connolly was a fireman. He joined in 1915. He was a member of a very strong citizen, not related to James Connolly, but his family were very much involved with the Citizen Army. And on the 24th of April 1916, his brother Sean called into Tyler Street Fire Station on his way from Liberty Hall to City Hall to tell Joe that the Rising was going ahead and he was needed. And one of the reasons he was needed was that he was a driver, and there were very few drivers available to the Citizen Army. Sean went on to City Hall, where of course he famously inflicted the first Crown Forces casualty when he shot the policeman on duty, and then became the first Republican casualty when in turn he was shot by a sniper from the castle. Joe Connolly here left Tyler Street, fought in the Rising, fought in the College of Surgeons. At the end of the fighting, he was sent to Frongach. And when he returned from Frongach, he simply walked back into his job in Dublin Fire Brigade. Because the corporation had brought in a bylaw in 1914 to encourage recruitment to the British forces, which promised to hold open the job of anyone who went into the military, pay them half pay, and for anyone who was ever in the public service, a very, very important thing, to continue their service, to count their service as pensionable service with the corporation. So when Joe came back from Frongach, he basically claimed 6 months half pay, the continuation of his service and his job back, and he got it because the whole political winds had changed. Even in 1922, the 3 men, him being one of them, who left the brigade to actually take up arms and fight with the Republican forces in Dublin, himself, Tom Kavanagh, and Austin MacDonald. When Dublin fell to the Free State, they simply melted back into the fire brigade and returned to duty with no questions asked. So no, I think the biggest casualty we had in Easter week was a horse. One of the fire horses, Bertie, was shot near Mount Street Bridge. And the reason I remember him is that I've seen the report that the fireman who was in charge of the ambulance that Bertie was pulling had to send in, and he wrote a very long apologetic letter to the chief about the horse getting shot. But he said he thought he'd recover quite well because he'd only been shot in the arm. So I think it was possibly the only horse that ever had an arm, but he held out great hope for his return to service.
We've a comment just there from James. He says, thanks for this talk. I grew up in a volunteer fire department family in Texas, and we have a few memorials to past members, and even a truck has been named after one of the members lost to suicide. Definitely a connection felt with a desire to see these men memorialized. And John here says, Laz, were there any Dublin Fire Brigade fatalities during the DF assistance to Belfast during the Blitz? Many thanks for a fascinating talk and your advocacy to Dublin Fire Brigade members.
In terms of the trips, the Belfast Blitz in 41, they went up twice. They went up on the 14th, 15th of April for the first raid, and then they went back for the big fire raid on the 5th of May. On one of the raids, I think on the first raid, a Dublin fireman was burned, quite badly burned. Now he was taken into the Royal Victoria, but when the rest of the men were recalled to Dublin that night, they wanted them out of the city before nightfall in case the Luftwaffe returned, and it was the second night. They were already there in breach of neutrality, and casualties would have been a hard thing to explain. When they got back to Dublin, basically a DFB ambulance was sent back to Belfast to get him out of hospital and get him into a Dublin hospital in case Belfast was bombed again and he was further injured or killed. There were minor injuries on the Belfast raids, but they were caused by, they were just from burns, minor burns, bruises, the normal kind of fireground injuries that you would get, but no fatalities. Lucky enough, no fatalities. Just to go back, I think it's great to say, and I've seen it in a number of brigades around around Europe and around. Certainly, it's very much a thing in the States to mark, the fallen members. It was something that we were bad at here, and we're doing it now, and we're doing it well. And it's nice. The DCC plaque scheme is a brilliant vehicle for doing that, and we're absolutely delighted by the response from DCC and from the commemorations and naming committee. They're very welcoming towards us and very welcoming towards the whole idea, and have been hugely supportive of it. So again, can't thank them enough. I think you may be muted there at the moment.
Sorry, you're right, Laz. I had to be
No problem.
No, I said I think
that's my trick,
I think that's all the questions here this evening. Yep, I think that's about everything. So look, thank you once again for a fabulous talk. As we said at the start of this event this evening, DublinFestivalofHistory.ie for all of our events. If you prefer online events, there are still a few there, and also the big weekend I mentioned earlier that's being held at Printworks this weekend. Most of the events there in the main hall are being live streamed, so check those out. Many more. So as Fallon, once again, thank you very much for your time this evening, and we look forward to your next talk and hear more about these plaques. And thank you everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening and rest of the festival.